Hello to all of you from Cambridge House CU, junior and senior. Really great to be able to share with you today. And I want to do something as we begin. I want to do a bit of a thought exercise. So I want you to go with me with this one. I want you to close your eyes for a moment. Close your eyes. And I want you, with your eyes closed, just to relax yourself. Maybe you want to take a deep breath in and then a deep breath out. Maybe you've had a stressful day and that feels really good. And I want you, with your eyes closed, feeling relaxed, to note down what's the first thing that comes into your mind when I say this name, Zacchaeus. Okay, have a think about what's the first thing that comes into your mind when I've said the name Zacchaeus. And you can open your eyes again. I'm going to suggest that some of you maybe thought about money. Some of you, maybe you had the picture of a tree in your mind. But I'll go out on a limb today, and I'm going to say that a lot of you thought about his height, and maybe the word short came into your mind. We grew up singing songs about Zacchaeus being a wee little man, but the thing is, if we focus too much on Zacchaeus' height, well then we may be in danger of completely missing the point of this passage of scripture. So what is the story of Zacchaeus all about? Well, let's read it and find out today. We read about Zacchaeus in the book of Luke, and we're going to read chapter 19, verses 1 to 10. He entered Jericho and was passing through, and there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich, and he was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd he could not, because he was small of stature. So he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all grumbled, He's gone in to be the guest of a man who's a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. And Jesus said to him, Today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. And we end our reading there. Luke 19 begins by telling us that Jesus was entering Jericho. At this point, well, Jesus was becoming well known, and lots of people were talking about him. He was going from place to place, preaching and teaching about God and his kingdom. But he was also performing miracles like healing the sick and giving sight to the blind. Everyone in Jericho, when they heard that Jesus was coming, well, they began rushing out to the street to see him. No doubt they'd heard the stories, and they wanted to check out who this guy was for themselves. And one of the people who wanted to see Jesus was Zacchaeus. Our Bible passage, well, it tells us that he was a chief tax collector, very wealthy, but also that he was a little bit short. Now, we'll come back to that in a moment, but for now, let's think about Zacchaeus' job. Tax collectors, well, back then, they weren't very popular, and there's two reasons for them being so disliked by other people. The first is this: they worked for the Roman government, and the Romans, well, they ruled God's people unfairly and gave them a hard time. The second reason why Zacchaeus would have been unpopular was because, well, tax collectors also cheated people out of money and then kept it for themselves. They would tell people that they owed more tax than they actually did, and the extra that they got, well, they would stuff into their own pockets. To make things even worse, well, Zacchaeus wasn't just your average tax collector. No, he was a chief tax collector, meaning that he was higher up the pay scale. Trevin Wax says this: Zacchaeus was indeed a wee little man, and not only physically, he was a small man spiritually, a crook that ripped off his neighbours and pocketed his profit at their expense. The guy wouldn't have had too many fans, but he would have been wealthy. He could buy plenty of nice things, and he could pretty much do what he wanted. And that sounds good in a way, doesn't it? This is the kind of thing that the world tells us we should aim for in life. Pleasure, enjoyment, comfort, and ease, even if it comes at other people's expense. That's life at its very best, the world says to us. But it's a delusion and it's a lie. How do we know? Well, because Zacchaeus had wealth and comfort, but he was very much still searching for something. And so when he heard that Jesus was in town, well, he wanted to go and see this man for himself. Maybe Jesus could provide him with the peace and the contentment that had eluded him so far. So Zacchaeus stepped out of his office and he joined the crowd. The problem was that because of his height issues, well, he couldn't actually see past the crowd. He tiptoed and squeezed between shoulders to try and see Jesus, but it was useless. He still couldn't even see the top of Jesus' head. The crowds, well, they didn't notice Zacchaeus. Maybe the reason they didn't let him through was because he didn't fit the idea of someone who would be seeking out Jesus in the first place. Maybe the crowds were thinking to themselves, why on earth is he trying to get through? He doesn't fit the bill. He's certainly not the kind of person that Jesus would want anything to do with. He doesn't deserve to get through and to see Jesus. But Zacchaeus, well, he wasn't about to give up. He had an idea, and it came to him when he saw a sycamore tree nearby. Sycamore trees, well, they're big, they're strong, and they give lots of shade. So if Zacchaeus was to climb into one, well, then he'd be able to see everything that was happening, but he'd also be fairly well hidden from the sight of other people. He thought that he'd found the perfect hiding spot, so you can imagine his surprise when he heard someone calling his name. Jesus was looking straight up at Zacchaeus and calling out to him from the crowd. Zacchaeus, well, he must have been stunned. How does Jesus even know my name? He must have thought to himself. And as if that wasn't surprising enough, Jesus then speaks to him again and he says, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, because today I must stay at your house. I don't know what Zacchaeus must have been thinking or feeling, but the Bible tells us this. He immediately did what Jesus said. Zacchaeus welcomed Jesus gladly. The people who saw what was going on, well, they were not impressed. We're told that they began to mutter to each other, he's gone to be the guest of a sinner. In other words, they were thinking to themselves, why does Jesus want to spend time with a sinful person like Zacchaeus? He's a cheater. There are much better people that Jesus could have dinner with. And we've all been there, haven't we? We've all been that judgmental at times. We've all looked at others and we've thought to ourselves that there's no hope for them. Or maybe that's how you feel about yourself. Maybe you've ruled yourself out of God's love. Well, that's why this story in the Bible is for us. It has an important lesson to teach us, and the lesson is this. Jesus didn't come for those who thought they were doing good and people who thought that they had it all together in life. No, Jesus came to call sinners to trust in him and to have their lives transformed by his love and grace. And that's exactly what happened to Zacchaeus. A guy called Jonathan Parnell says this. Every other religion tells us to seek. We're advised to climb trees like Zacchaeus. We're told to bridge the gulf by our effort. In a sense, that is the world. We live in a planet full of seekers. We are, in one way or another, tree climbers, maneuvering ourselves to gain some advantage, to achieve some perspective, to find personal peace. And then Jesus comes. All our seeking, our trying to reach the divine on our own, is silenced when we learn that the divine has reached down to us by becoming one of us. Jesus reached out to Zacchaeus when he had climbed his tree, and it resulted in a new motivation as Zacchaeus' heart was totally transformed. How do we know that Zacchaeus' heart had been transformed? Well, look at what he says as he enjoys dinner with Jesus. He says, look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I've cheated anybody out of anything, well, I'll give it back 4 times the amount. Zacchaeus, he met with Jesus, and suddenly everything changed for him. Salvation came to Zacchaeus' house because Jesus came to his house. Where Jesus is, there is salvation. Where salvation is, there is a renewal and a restructuring of a person's entire life. Zacchaeus, he realized the sin in his life. He realized the love that God had for him. He realized that Jesus was the only way to be saved, and so he put his trust in Jesus. How do we know? Well, because Zacchaeus calls Jesus Lord, And that means that he recognizes Jesus as the one who rules his life. Jesus is now the one he wants to follow and live for. And that's what has transformed him from a hated cheat to a generous giver. Our Bible passage ends with that important reminder. Jesus came to seek and save the lost. Again, Trevin Wax says this: Jesus had come to seek those left behind by everyone else. He came to save those deemed not worth the effort. He loved those whom no one else would love. He came to die for a world that didn't see the need for his salvation. The Good Shepherd went looking for his sheep, not because he needed the sheep, but because the sheep would die without him. And Jonathan Parnell says Christianity is summed up in these words: Jesus came to seek and save the lost. If we were asked to describe in a sentence the heart of the gospel, there it is. The truth is this: we all have sin in our hearts. We're all lost, but nobody is ever so lost or so bad that Jesus can't change them. So let's follow the example of Zacchaeus today. Let's tell Jesus that we want him to be the Lord of our lives. When we do that, will we find forgiveness? Forgiveness that will transform us, and we'll be given a new motivation to live for.